So let's look at 2027. What might be the future for insights and market research? So here is the agenda I'm going to follow. I'm going to start by explaining what I mean by scenario thinking, have a look at where we are now, introduce these two ideas of premises and factors, moving on to the scenarios, and then of course the so what. A lot of the time you'll hear people making predictions about the future, and predictions are really difficult. So this goes back to a study that Philip Tetlock did from 1984 to 2005. He was an academic looking in this area. He followed 284 experts and he followed 28,000 predictions they made to find out whether they came true. And he found that they were worse than random. And the phrase he used in this book, Expert Political Judgment, was they were worse than a chimp throwing a dart at a dartboard. And so we see that the history of predictions is that they tend to be wrong. So what can we do about that? Well, one of the alternatives is to work with scenarios. If we have a look here, where is the ball going to roll? If we make a prediction, we've got a 1 in 3 chance of being right and a 2 in 3 chance of being wrong. But if we say that we are relatively sure the ball will go down one of these 3 main routes, then we are not going to be wrong. So instead of focusing on always being right, let's focus on never being wrong. There are 3 scenarios. Here's what you need to bear in mind about those scenarios. Here's the sort of planning you need to put in place. Here is how you recognize which scenario is happening. Now, when we work with scenarios, we need to think about the time frame. If we try to forecast too far into the future, there are too many scenarios. It is too confusing. It's not useful. If we don't forecast far enough into the future, then there is not enough variation to make it useful. So we pick the right sort of time frame. In this analysis, I've picked 5 years, 2027. I'm looking at the world of market research and insights. It's a global picture, but with a special note for the Asia Pacific region. Before we start working out where we're going to be, we have to know where we are now. Even if you had a clear map telling you where the hidden treasure was, it would be useless unless you knew where you were currently. So let's have a look at where the world of insights and market research is. So I'm going to draw heavily on information from SMR and the Global Market Research Report. We're a large industry, approximately $120 billion of turnover, and we're dominated by the USA in that over half of all the dollars in the world that are spent on market research and insights are spent in and through the United States. Another quarter are spent in Europe. So this is very much a westernized industry. Of course, there are millions of dollars, in fact, billions of dollars being spent in Africa and America and the Middle East. But as a proportion, they are much smaller. The next thing we need to take on board is that what we call market research, when we talk to market researchers and at market research conferences, is only about 40% of the insights industry. This is something that we've become more aware of over the last few years. And I've highlighted there this number at the top, 40%. The tech-enabled research, sometimes called res tech, is almost as big. Well, it was almost as big in 2021, which is where this financial data comes from. It probably is as big now. And then we have another section to do with reporting and consulting. When we look at the growth in this tech-enabled research or res tech is much faster than in established research. Established research is what we think of with questionnaires and focus groups and depth interviews. And that is growing much more slowly than the res tech enabled. And that is where we're going to see a lot of the change happening in the future. If we look at a bit of an international picture, what we can see is, yes, the USA is just over half. The UK is considerably bigger than any other country in this sector too. And then we see some Asia Pacific countries, China, India, Australia, Japan, further down the list, South Korea. When we look in detail at the data, what we notice is that Asia Pacific countries tend to over-index on established research, questionnaires, surveys, focus groups, depth interviews, but they under-index on the res tech, the tech-enabled research, with the exception of India. India does very well in that zone. Most of the other countries do not. Also, if we look at the whole global picture, we see about 2/3 of all the insight spending is in English-speaking countries. And this has an impact on the industry. In the USA, it's easier to create startups. You're looking at half the spending in the world is happening through the USA. It's a single language. And this drives a focus on the American language and the American culture in the way that we think about problems and solve problems. There are some other key factors we need to bear in mind about where we are at the moment. Qualitative research is holding its own. Its position in established research is about 15%. We did see a major change in how it was conducted come through the pandemic. Online had been developing steadily for years, but accelerated and became the predominant method of doing qualitative research. That's changed a little bit post-pandemic, but not much. More than 50% of research is what I call no questions research. Transactional data, passive monitoring, social media observations, all of these sorts of things. Not focus groups, not depth interviews, not surveys. More than 50% of research projects are being conducted internally by clients now. That is changing the way we're doing things. Participation rates around the world are falling. Fewer and fewer people want to do surveys or attend focus groups. And there has been a massive growth in the problems caused by people who are fraudulently doing surveys. They're using bots to do surveys. There is a big battle going on between the panel companies and all of these frauds trying to get into the data. So I mentioned these terms premises and factors. Here's the first of them. Premises are things that we are going to assume for the purpose of this project are definitely going to happen during the next 5 years, the time frame for the project. So during the next 5 years, the amount of data will continue to grow. That doesn't seem a very radical suggestion. The use of customer information by organizations will increase. It is in vogue. People are data hungry. More data is becoming available. Data regulations will get stricter and become more onerous. It's going to be harder and harder to meet all of the rules. Timelines will get shorter and budgets will tend to shrink. This has kind of always been the case, and it isn't going to change in the next 5 years. The supply of talented insight professionals won't significantly increase. There is a talent shortage, there is a labour shortage. We have got declining birth rates, we have a growth in the number of possible professions. It's hard to imagine that we are going to get suddenly more people coming into our industry. The demand for DIY research will increase over the next 5 years, and so will the number of DIY options. We're seeing an absolute amazing growth in the number of options for doing DIY. Tactical research will grow faster than strategic research. This has usually been the case, and it will continue to be the case in the near future. You have more situations where you want to test and add, where you want to develop a new concept, where you want to do a dipstick test to find out why people are doing something, as opposed to the strategic review of our orientation and direction. And there are going to be more new entrants from non-traditional suppliers of market research and insights. Remember, I said that the traditional is only about 40% of the whole industry at the moment. Lots of the newcomers are coming in from outside our industry. Then we get to the factors. These are the things that might have 2 or more possibilities within the next 5 years. And I'm going to split them into exogenous factors, things that happen to us from outside the world of market research and insight, and endogenous factors, things that happen inside the world of market research and insight. So the first I want to look at over the next 5 years is geopolitical. And the news is that it's going to be bad news or very bad news. So bad news is if things stabilize roughly as they are, maybe things get slightly better with Russia and the Ukraine, the tensions over Taiwan and China don't get any worse, that's about as good as it's going to get. The downside is things could get a lot worse. We could have more conflicts in the Middle East. We could have more conflicts in terms of Russia and other countries. We could have conflicts in the Pacific region. All of that, of course, would be bad for business as well as bad for the world and bad for people. In terms of finance, again, the choices are kind of bad or very bad. Over the next 5 years, we're going to have some inflation and slightly high interest rates, some pressure on investment. Or we're going to have high inflation, high interest rates, wild swings in currency exchange rates, recessions and crashes. So it's bad or very bad. International trade, kind of again, similar, bad or very bad. We're not going to see lots and lots of new open trading. We're not going to see lots of reductions of barriers. We're going to see some sort of stabilization, or we're going to see less and less free trade with more barriers, more tariffs, more restrictions. In terms of technology, for the last 20, 30 years, there's been a fantastic expansion of human connectivity. Most people in the world now have a mobile phone. That mobile phone connects to the internet. That's a phenomenal level of connectivity, and that could continue. But we're also seeing a real possibility that it will become balkanized, that the internet in China doesn't talk to the internet in Iran, does not talk to the internet in Russia, does not talk to the internet in Saudi Arabia, maybe does not talk to the internet in Brazil, maybe does not talk to the internet in the United Kingdom, that we're going to see brands try to put up new walls within that system too. So we have an upside and we have a downside. In terms of the environment, obviously the good side is we have no catastrophes. The downside is we have a major earthquake, we have a tsunami, we have a volcano causing airlines not to be able to fly, we have a pandemic. All of these things are unlikely, but the pandemic has taught us that they are possible. We need to keep them in our mind. Now thinking about the endogenous factors, things that happen from inside the world of market research. AI for the last 10 years has mostly focused on improving current processes. So it may continue to do that, or it could start to significantly replace current processes. Are we going to see open ends handed over much more to AI? Are we going to see conversational AI coming into play? Are we going to see the analytics done more with AI? Platforms, they have been growing in a quite strong but linear fashion. What happens if they really take off in terms of power, ease of use, and considerably lower cost? Participation levels. This is another bad news or very bad. They could stabilize at the current low level of cooperation and the current bad level of fraud, or we could see a continued decrease in cooperation and really significant increases in the fraud, which would lead to a real move away from questions research. USA dominance, about 50% of MR and insights is already USA. If that were to expand over the next 5 years to 60 to 70%, it would very much push the world into a homogenized, more English language, more capitalist, more Western focused way of thinking about research. Other things we want to keep in mind. Data breaches. We've just seen horrendous data breaches in Australia where lots of medical data was captured and released by Russian hackers onto the internet. What would happen if that happened in the insights industry? How might that really change our ability to operate? We're seeing a growth of interest in diversity and ethics. How are we going to accommodate that? Human centricity. We've moved away from product centricity to human centricity. That is very good for the research world because we're the people who focus on humans. Some emerging phenomena, things you're going to need to keep abreast of over the next 5 years: automated qual, automated analysis. The metaverse, of course, conversational data collection, biometrics and neuroscience are beginning to become more useful, and we're going to see some new gadgets. Watch out for the Microsoft HoloLens. That is likely to have quite an impact over the next 5 years. So with that, I created the scenarios. 2 dimensions. The first dimension, the top-bottom dimension, is established research is positive. People stay wanting surveys, questionnaires, focus groups, depth interviews because of the depth of information and the fact you can do more than just behavior. The alternative is we carry on shifting towards the res tech, the DIY and the AI. So that is one dimension. The second dimension is the geopolitics finance is, I've called it positive. What I mean is it doesn't get any worse. And on the other side, geopolitics and finance crisis, they get worse. So if we stay roughly as we are, or maybe a slight improvement, we're on the right-hand side of the map. If things get worse, we're on the left-hand side of the map. So let's fill in the details. 2019 Mark II. So this is like the pre-pandemic world. We see established research grow and we see res tech grow. They both grow. We see domestic research growing and international research growing. Yes, we're going to see new entrants into the space. We're going to see AI and automation improving efficiency, and we're going to see more focus on participant quality. The second has a dystopian name, Brave New World. If the politics and finance are relatively positive, but there is a growing shift away from established research towards tech DIY, what we're going to see is tech-enabled expanding even more rapidly. Local agencies become less central. The more tech we have, the more clients will be tempted to do their research internationally from their head office rather from local places. We're going to see even more new entrants into the research space. We're going to see AI focused on the DIY rather than on making researchers more effective. And we're going to see established research in decline. If, on the other hand, we see a negative geopolitics, we're going to see, I think, a shift even more so towards tech, DIY and AI. Tech-enabled research is going to expand very rapidly. AI is going to focus on DIY. Focus on English will grow. So we've got financial problems. Most headquartered companies in the world that are major are in English-speaking countries, or they're in countries like Germany, Switzerland, and so on, where they choose to use English as the lingua franca. The tools are going to default towards English. Prices for most research are going to have to fall, so they're going to be using these platforms. They're going to be simpler research. Established research will be saved for hard problems. Hard problems are problems you can't solve with DIY tools, with off-the-shelf tools, and you have to solve them. So there are lots of difficult problems which you can't solve, but you don't have to solve them. Hard problems are things you have to solve, but they can't be solved with the simple tools. And we're going to see reduced budgets in the APAC region if we're talking about more financial problems, and we're going to be seeing more tech, DIY, AI. And the final sector is, what about a financial crisis and a shift towards more established research? I think it's simply improbable. I can't see, if we're running through difficult times, it not being driven towards res tech. So what are my recommendations for clients? You will need to grow the use of platforms. It is going to happen. So if you're an insight manager, you want to be driving this process. You don't want it to be happening spontaneously throughout the organization without you doing that. So create internal processes to be agile, scalable, and quality assured. You want to be the coaches, not the doers of a lot of this. Have agency partners who can help you deal with the capacity when there's more work and those hard cases. Assume you're going to need to change platforms every couple of years. They are changing so quickly. The technology is fantastic. The best today will not be the best in 2 years' time. Monitor data quality, especially anything where you're using black box solutions. Where has the sample come from? How has that sample been checked? Use qual specialists for most qual research. Most automation is not ready yet for business critical projects. Don't be suckered in. There is a real difference between the quality of the quant solutions and the quality of the qual solutions. For agencies, you need to use the AI and automation to improve your efficiency. Don't try to get your staff to work harder for less pay. What you need them to do is to work much more productively by using AI and automation. You need to develop a sales mentality, a sales team, and a sales system, because you are going to be challenged. You are really going to need to promote yourself properly. You're going to have to decide what balance between being a tech-enabled company and a specialist in, quotes, real research, the ethnographies, the depth interviews, the deep analysis, the segmentations, and so on. If you're a big company, you will obviously do both, but you'll have divisions for them. If you're a small company, you probably want to focus on just one of those two. If we're in the good times, the right-hand side of the map that I was showing, you want to be attracting good staff, you want to be pushing the real research and the specialist options. If we're on the left-hand side of that map, you're going to be needing to scale back and push your tech-enabled solutions, the scalable things. What about people like you and me, individuals? Two key options as we go forward. You can either really focus on managing these changes, the person implementing AI and automation. So you are going to be the groundbreaker. You're going to be riding this wave. Or you're going to avoid competing with the machines. You're going to be an ethnographer, a customer success manager, a storyteller, a strategist, a data analyst. There are lots and lots of things which in the next 5 years are not going to be threatened by AI, automation, ResTech. In fact, they're going to be enhanced. Key skills. Number one is the same as ever, understanding business. The second one is how to use AI and automation to make yourself more efficient. You need to focus on story finding and on storytelling, and you want a speciality. Don't just be good at everything. Think T-shaped. Have something you are particularly good at. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.